When I took the maid's position at the Holloway mansion, I thought the hardest part would be scrubbing marble floors the size of ballrooms, or polishing chandeliers that hung higher than any ladder dared to reach, or maybe hauling laundry from the endless bedrooms, sheets that smelled faintly of perfume I'd never be able to afford. But it wasn't the dust or the endless windows that broke me. It was the stains. The first time I saw them, I thought it was a prank. A splash of wine left behind by some careless guest. Because the Holloways entertained often. Long dinners, crystal glasses, the hum of conversations that carried through the halls, even when I wasn't supposed to be listening. It made sense that someone spilled, except no one ever seemed to spill that much. The stains were not just drops. They were blotches. Rust red, spreading across the white linen tablecloth like a wound, dripping down the chair legs, pooling on the polished oak floor. The sight of them made my stomach twist. I scrubbed until my hands burned. Bleach, hot water, more bleach. My knuckles raw. The smell of chemicals clogging my throat. By the time I finished, the table gleamed again. Perfect. Untouched. The next morning they were back. Exactly the same. Same shape. Same size. As if the cloth had been dipped in blood and then carefully reset. Stain for stain. The Holloways never mentioned them. Not once. They ate breakfast at that table every morning, sipping espresso, flipping through newspapers, their silk dressing gowns brushing the very spots I had spent hours scrubbing. They didn't even flinch when their elbows rested in the crimson smears. I thought I was losing my mind. I told myself maybe I hadn't cleaned properly. Maybe the stains were seeping through from underneath. But when I checked, the wood was spotless. Only the cloth was marked. I started dreading mornings. My shift began early, before sunrise. And every day the first thing I saw when I entered the dining hall was that spreading, rusty bloom across the fabric. It was always waiting for me, like it knew I was coming. After a week, I began to wonder if the Holloways themselves were testing me. Rich families sometimes set traps for their staff. I'd heard stories, a coin left on a dresser to see if the maid would pocket it, a smear of dust on a shelf to check if she missed it. Maybe this was their way of keeping me in line. But then why didn't they ever acknowledge it? Why eat over it, ignoring the smell of iron that seemed to linger, faint but undeniable? By the second week, I couldn't take it anymore. One night, I stayed late. I told the butler I was doing extra polishing, and when everyone went to bed, I hid in the shadows of the dining hall. The mansion grew quiet around me, the kind of silence that isn't peaceful but heavy, like it's pressing on your chest. The grandfather clock ticked from the hallway, steady and slow. I waited. At exactly 3:12 a.m., the chandelier flickered. Just once. And then, the stains appeared. Not slowly, not like a spill spreading across fabric. They appeared all at once, as if the cloth itself had bled from within. Thick, dark patches blooming into reality in the space of a breath. I froze, staring at them, until something in the chandelier's crystal drops caught my eye. A reflection. There, seated around the table, were figures. Pale, translucent, but solid enough to hold glasses in their hands. They lifted them in unison, a silent toast. Their mouths moved, but no sound came. And then they looked at me. I stumbled backward, nearly knocking over a chair. But when I blinked, the figures were gone. The stains, though, remained. I barely slept that night. The next morning I came to the dining hall like always. The Holloways were already seated, calm as ever. The stains were fresh again, right where they had been at 3:12. Mrs. Holloway daintily placed her cup down, her hand inches from the mark. Mr. Holloway rustled his paper. They dined with them, as if nothing was wrong, as if they were used to sharing the table. I wanted to scream, to demand an explanation, to ask how they could live like this. But I didn't, because their silence told me everything. They already knew, and they had chosen to live with it. That day, I gave my notice. I told the butler I was unwell, that I couldn't handle the work. He nodded, as though he'd heard it before, as though he understood. On my last morning, I walked through the dining hall one final time. The stains were there, brighter than ever. And for the first time, I didn't try to scrub them away. I left the mansion, but I didn't leave the sound behind. Because sometimes when I close my eyes, I still hear it. The faint, hollow clink of glasses, raised in a midnight toast. And I wonder who, or what, the Holloways are really dining with. They say money buys protection, but not from this. Not from what hides in the halls of the rich, waiting for the lights to go out. If these stories shook you, hit like, drop a comment, and share before the whispers find you too. And if you're still here, subscribe. Because once you know what the nannies saw, you'll never look at luxury the same way again. The Carlyle's estate had a rule: never touch the mirrors. Odd rule for a maid's job, but I didn't question it at first. Rules are the only thing you can rely on in a house that runs on them. When to fold the napkins, which side of the bed the lady preferred, the exact stitch length for the afternoon curtains. The butler told me the mirror rule with a polite, clipped smile and a look that said, some orders are better obeyed without asking why. There were dozens of them. Antique frames in every hallway, gilt and baroque, carved with leaves and faces that seemed to whisper at the edge of sight. Floor to ceiling in the grand salon, small hand mirrors in the bedrooms, convex things in the servants' corridor that made you look like a funhouse stranger. Each one was polished so perfectly, it felt like the glass might swallow you whole. My job was to dust around them, never on them. Wipe the sills, sweep the frames, buffet the silver polish away if it caught on the edge. The housekeepers had trained me well. Learn the pattern, learn the rhythm, and keep your head down. So when I found a fingerprint one afternoon in the east wing, I did not know what to do. It was high up on a glass in the corridor. Too high for me, pressed flat as if someone had rested their palm there from the other side. The mark was not the greasy smudge my own hands made. It had ridges, the faint crescent of a wedding band in the center. It looked like proof someone had been leaning on the glass, listening, breathing. Against orders, I wiped it away. I told myself I'd only dust it, that I'd be careful. But the cloth left streaks, then clear letters, as if the glass resisted clean hands. I scrubbed until my knuckles ached and the satin of the hall light blurred into a haze. The smudge was gone. The glass looked as though polished by angels. I should have been relieved. Instead, I felt exposed, like I had touched a sleeping thing, and it had woken. That night the house was warm and ordinary. I locked up the east wing at 10, tucked the cleaning supplies into the linen closet, and told myself to sleep. But I woke at 2:17 a.m. to the sound of breath. Not mine, not the house's regulated hush. When I went to the corridor to check, the temperature shifted, cooler than the rest of the house. My breath fogged in front of the glass, though the thermostat read a mild 22 degrees. Letters traced themselves into the mist on the mirror opposite me, backwards, as if someone were inside us writing from the other side. I blinked hard. The vapor smeared and resolved into a single, blunt message, written in the mirror and visible only in reverse reflection. Let us out. The writing looked like a child's, uneven and urgent. My palms slicked. I pressed my fingertips against the glass. Cold bit into the pads of my fingers. There was no one on the other side. I could have walked away. I should have. But curiosity is a small, relentless thing. I stood there and watched while wet, ghostly fingers dragged down the inside of the glass, wiping away the last letter as if collapsing at the finish of some impossible job. I did not sleep that night. I clocked in the next morning with circles under my eyes and a tremor in the way I folded the napkins. After that, things spiraled. At first, they were small. A mouth in the edge of a mirror that didn't sync with my lips. A blink from the corner that occurred half a second after I blinked. Then faces began to gather. Not whole faces. Fragments. A forehead in one glass. A cheekbone in another. Dozens of eyes flickering as though pushed by a crowd. They were always behind me, crowded in the reflection space the glass created, pressing their palms to the other side as if to feel the warmth of my breath. I started checking the mirrors when no one else was around. I learned their schedule, the way the library's glass fogged in the rain, how the small hand mirror in Miss Carlyle's boudoir held its own light even during the day. I saw a woman in a black dress behind me one afternoon, mouthing words I couldn't hear. Once, a child's fist hammered the other side of the glass, and the sound was like a drumbeat in my chest. I spun around. The corridor was empty. When I looked back, a smear of condensation spelled 4 letters. S-T-A-Y. The Carlyles never reacted. They walked past the mirrors as if blind to them, like strangers who had become accustomed to a building's idiosyncrasies. Mrs. Carlyle would sweep through in the morning with her gloves on, glance at her reflection, and tilt her head the way one does to correct a hat. Mr. Carlyle read the paper in the salon and paused only to adjust the cuff of his sleeve in the mirrored sideboard. If they saw the faces, they did not acknowledge it. If they felt the palms pressed towards them, they did not flinch. When I asked the butler once, a question slipped out between folding table linens and polishing the silver, he only sighed and said, "They ask a lot of the house. We do what is asked." His tone was gentle, but there was a tiredness in his voice, like someone who'd handed answers down, like dishes for years. The message was clear. Some things in large houses are for keeping, not for fixing. My need to prove myself right became the thing that ate me. I began to press my face to the glass, to lean in until the frames bit my shoulders. I taped small notes to the back of certain mirrors, questions, words, and waited for an answer. More often than not, the notes were smeared the next day, as if someone on the other side had tried to read and failing, had dragged tears across the paper. Once I found my own handwriting, reversed and trembling, traced into the condensation. H-E-L-P. I stopped sleeping properly. I dreamed in frames and reflections, chasing a woman who would step through if only I screamed loud enough. The house felt smaller, its corridors looping like a maze built of looking glass. I began to dread the midday when the sun struck silver and 100 faces lit up like a city in glass. I'd find myself avoiding the east wing, taking the long way around to avoid the mirrors, and then beating my fists against my own chest for cowardice. The mirrors always watched me do it. On the day I left, every mirror in the house went black. It was not a moment I noticed right away. I was packing a small suitcase in the servant's spare room when the butler tapped my shoulder and said, "They aren't responding to the light." I followed him through the halls. The salon mirrors, which had reflected the chandelier like a tide of stars, stood dark and matte, like pools of oil. Even the convex mirrors in the corridor were ink. I pressed my palm to one and my fingers sank into cold that did not breathe. In the final mirror I passed, an oval in the stairwell leading to the servants' quarters. My reflection did not follow me. I moved. The glass did not move with me. I lifted my hand, expecting to see myself mimic the gesture, and the oval remained a black, empty eye. For a second, that stretched and thinned into something sharp. I felt something behind that eye. A patient, terrible waiting. I don't know if the mirrors closed because I had touched them, or because I finally left, or because the quiet thing inside decided it had done enough waiting for one life. All I know is that on my way out, the butler did not ask why I was leaving. He only offered me a cup of tea I did not drink, and his eyes were weary, as if he'd been carrying a weight for decades. Sometimes, in the dark of my tiny room in a different town, I catch my face in a shop window and start. For a breath, I think I see other faces behind me, pressed to the inside of a glass that is not meant to be touched. Then the reflection steadies into ordinary me, tired and human. I tell myself I imagine the whole thing, that the houses I clean teach you to see patterns where none exist, to make stories, to keep away the real loneliness of polishing other people's lives. But when the rain comes and the cold makes the world fog its own mirrors, I still hear the faintest scrawl of breath against an inner glass. I still see, in the corner of my eye, the backward letters forming like tiny, desperate hands. Let us out. For a mansion with 40 rooms, the laundry was strangely small. It sat at the end of a dim corridor off the servants' wing. A single narrow room with a concrete floor, a washer, a dryer, a utility sink, and a metal cart that rolled on squeaky casters. In a house of chandeliers and marble staircases, the laundry felt like an afterthought. The butler carried the key on a chain at his waist and never, ever left it out. Only he goes in there, he told me once, as if reciting a rule written into the house itself. Only he knows the cycles. Most of the time, it was easy to accept it. Luxury houses have private rooms, wine cellars, gun cabinets, cabinets for things you don't ask about. But sometimes, when I carried laundry carts down that corridor, I'd hear a sound leaking through the keyhole, thin and low and steady like a machine running far more substantial than the single washer should allow. It was not the ordinary hum of motors. It had a tone that sat in the bones, a low, thrumming chant that made my teeth ache. At first, I blamed the pipes. Old houses have voices. The holloways down the lane once swore the mansion sang at night when the wind hit the eaves. I folded that explanation and put it away, useful and simple. But the sound kept finding me, pressed into the corners of my day. When I unloaded linen, when I passed with bathrobes and duvet covers, the hum threaded the air like a promise I could not name. Curiosity in this job is a dangerous thing. It burrows. It starts as a small itch. You notice one slave stitch undone, then another. And before long, you're leaning too close to a pattern you can't unsee. The laundry's rhythm grew into an obsession. I asked the kitchen staff and the housekeepers. They shrugged, lowered their voices. The machines work at odd hours, one said, eyes sliding away. The butler always answered with a shadow of a smile. We maintain what must be maintained. One night, after everyone had gone to bed, and the estate sank into the kind of silence that isn't empty so much as waiting, I took the butler's ring from his hook. He left it there sometimes when he cleaned his shoes. I told myself I would look quickly. Just a glance to settle my nerves. I told myself I would be careful. The key fit the lock like two old acquaintances. The door opened with a single, polite click, and air rushed out that smelled of damp and rot, not like earth, but like something once soft and forgotten left to sour. It was the smell you get when you open a forgotten trunk at the back of an attic, and every memory inside has gone bad. My throat tightened. The washer and dryer were running. The drums spun so fast the metal had the blur of a heartbeat, but they were empty. No clothes, no linens. Just water, if you could call it that, sloshing inside the glass portholes and moving like ink. When the light caught it, The surface swelled and resolved into a color I couldn't name. Black as old lacquer, thick and reflecting not light, but the shapes of things beneath it. On the concrete floor, in shallow puddles around the machines, scraps of fabric lay scattered. The cuff of a child's sweater, a button missing its partner, a ribbon with one frayed end. There were tiny shoes too, corded and dulled, as if waded through a mud of something that never dried. A stuffed rabbit lay in two pieces, the seam split open, and stuffing trailing into the water. I didn't need to be told what those things meant. They were too small for grown hands, too familiar in their childlike sorrow. I stumbled back. The door slammed shut with a soft finality that had nothing accidental in it. My heartbeat ricocheted against my ribs. The machines groaned, and then the sound changed into something more human. A chorus of small, desperate noises winding through the pipes and motors. Shrills and half-formed words. A rasping insistence like someone trying to call a name through too many walls. I pressed my ear to the dryer's door and heard a faint, frantic pounding from within. The sound of tiny fists beating leather. Air trembled across the concrete. For a moment, the world narrowed to the pitch of those sounds and the smell that seemed to press against the back of my throat. My hand reached toward the porthole, an idiot reflex to touch, to know. The glass was warm under my palm. It shivered like a heart. They were not washing clothes. They were running something that sounded like ritual. A cycle that churned not to clean but to keep something moving, as if motion itself was a requirement. The black water spat and wrapped in the drum. The voices braided into a single thread. Hush, hush, stay, stay. Not words of comfort. Commands. I don't remember how long I stood there. Minutes slipped into some weightless time, the kind you get when your body is listening to something your mind shouldn't. I must have made a noise. One of those tiny human noises that mark your presence. Because the chant rose, pitch and urgency. And for 3 heartbeats, I imagined a dozen small shapes pressing at the inside of the glass. Faces smeared by condensation. Mouths open in a sound that carried no air. The machines shuddered. The room spun. Then everything went bluntly, impossibly still. The wash stopped as cleanly as a light switched off. The black water settled into an even surface that reflected me in dull, drowning detail. There were no fingerprints on the door, no steam curling into the lint trap, no evidence of the commotion except the smell that clung to my clothes like a shadow. I left the key where I had found it, hands that wouldn't stop shaking. I walked back to the servants' wing under a sky that had not changed, stars ignoring the house's secrets. The butler nodded at me in the morning, as if the previous night had been ordinary. He handed me a basket of linen with the same steady hands he used for everything. His eyes were kind and exhausted, as if understanding too much. Heating vents, he said, when I finally demanded something. Anything. Old houses talk through the pipes. You'll get used to it. His voice was a placard. It did not convince me. After that, every time I brought laundry near the door, the smell seeped under the frame before I opened it. Sometimes the hum began as I pushed the cart, a distant machine call that vibrated in the soles of my feet. At odd hours, when the house was otherwise perfectly at rest, little fists would pound the other side in a staccato rhythm that made my teeth ache when I turned away and told myself it was the pipes. It was the plumbing. It was anything but what I had seen. The nightmares began. I dreamed of a white fabric unraveling into black water, of tiny shoes tumbling like drowned moons. In the dreaming hours, I could hear the chorus more clearly. Please, please, let us out. It was always a child's voice, thin and terrified, threaded with the same command I had heard in the machine's rhythm. Stay. I lasted 2 more weeks. I cleaned the marble, folded the napkins, made beds with corners sharp as promises. I pretended normalcy so well I nearly believed in it. But at night, the laundry smell followed me into my room, and in the quiet moments between folding and serving, I saw the torn rabbit drifting through my mind, eyes stuffed with lint. On the day I left, I put my uniform into the laundry cart and took it past the door. The room was as it had always been, a sterile square of utility. The machines were turned off, the floor was dry. The black water did not ripple. The butler met me by the back stairs and accepted my resignation with a nod that had no surprise in it. "You did the right thing," he said, and for once, his voice sounded relieved. It wasn't clear whether he meant for me or for them. I walked away with my suitcase and the smell of rot still clinging to my collar. In the weeks after, I tried to convince myself that I had been mistaken, that the water was shadow, that the shoes were washed remnants, that the pounding was nothing but old pipes. But sometimes when I pass a laundromat late at night, and the machines drum behind glass, I stop and watch the circular windows spin. In the motion, I swear the water darkens, and for a second, I hear small hands, knocking, calling. The sound braided into the drum's mechanical rhythm. "Stay. Please stay." The Benedetti penthouse had everything. Gold-plated faucets that caught the sun like coins, velvet drapes heavy enough to muffle a scream, chandeliers that looked like frozen fireworks. It was the kind of place people photographed and called art, and when I first took the job, I thought I'd entered the part of my life where every shift paid off in small luxuries. Good wages, steady hours, the kind of references that open doors. But the oddest thing in the penthouse was the guest room on the 27th floor. No one cleaned it, no one touched it. Not the housekeepers, not the night staff, not even the butler when he was doing his rounds. It was always impossibly immaculate. Every other room carried the fingerprints of life. Crumbs that gathered at the tea tray, dust rings on the backs of armchairs, the tiny wrinkle that betrayed someone had slept there. The guest room had none of that. The bed was made with mechanical precision. The linen smelled faintly of lavender, as if a pressed sachet lived inside the mattress. The curtains gave the impression they had just been drawn, though no breeze ever moved them, and the city hum below never crept up that high. When I asked why we were never to enter it, Mrs. Benedetti's smile froze like a photograph. "That room is occupied," she said, the words falling away like coins. She didn't explain. She didn't need to. In a house where money answered most questions, a clipped sentence and a hard mouth were instructions. We had rules for everything. How to fold a napkin, which side of the pillow to fluff, where to leave the silver if a guest arrived unexpectedly. "Do not enter the west guest room," the head housekeeper told me on my first day, as though telling me the hours for tea. "No one goes in. No cleaning, no airing. If you must pass, close the door behind you." She said it without drama, the way one might tell someone not to forget the soup on the stove. At first, the rule was simply another notch on a long list. I swept past the door every morning, cart full of linens, and watched the polished knob wink back at me. Sometimes, when the rest of the penthouse felt too loud with music or guests, I'd pause just outside and listen. Always there was silence. Not the comfortable quiet of a room unoccupied, but a dense, deliberate hush. The first time I noticed movement, I blamed my eyes. I was late, running a mop along the hallway, thoughts full of tomorrow's schedule, when the curtain fluttered at the far end. Subtle, like someone had passed a hand near it. I stopped, mop in the air. No draft. The heating vents were off. The city's glass below roared unchanged. I told myself the building settled, that the fabric had caught on a nail somewhere. I told myself a lot of things. Weeks passed. The room continued to make itself perfect. If a dust mote accumulated in the corner was immaculate by morning. If a window left a faint film, the glass shimmered clean by 9. The housekeepers joked, quietly, about a helpful ghost. We laughed the way you laugh at neighbors' quirks when you don't want to be the one who looks too hard. Then one night, when the rest of the staff had gone, a late delivery kept me working. I had volunteered, stupid, eager me, to straighten the penthouse library after an evening with a visiting curator. I lost track of time, fingers full of book spines, when I heard the scrape. It was soft, like a chair being dragged a careful inch across carpet. It stopped. Then it started again. A slow, measured movement that threaded through the floorboards. My heart hammered in a way that had nothing to do with the stairs. I told myself to be reasonable. An errant cleaner, a guest who'd returned, someone chasing their cat. But this was the 27th floor. There were cameras in the hall and locked doors, and a ledger of arrivals the size of a small novel. I pushed open the guest room door a crack. The room was perfect in a way that felt keen. The bedspread was iron taut as skin. The bedside lamp glowed with a soft, interior light, as if someone had just put their hand there and left. A pair of slippers sat side by side at the edge of the bed, heel to heel, the kind you arrange for a guest so they won't stumble in the dark. But no luggage, no scent of perfume, no sign of occupancy beyond the small, deliberate arrangements. And then I saw her. She sat on the bed, as still as the room itself, a figure in black, hair long and wet-looking, falling in a sheen that caught the light like oil. Her dress was dark and plain. It didn't reach the floor, but it pooled at her knees like spilled ink. She turned her head slowly toward me, not with curiosity, but with the steady tilt of something waiting. The mirror on the opposite wall did not reflect me. It reflected her. For a second, my brain refused to match the facts. Mirrors are mirrors. They show you the angle of your nose, the tilt of a shoulder. But this glass showed only her. A pale face, dark hair plastered to one cheek, eyes that seemed too old for the smoothness of her skin. When she spoke, it was as if the words were formed on a mouth I could only see in a reflection. "Leave my things alone," she said. The sound was a whisper, but it filled the room like steam. My mouth worked. I wanted to ask who she was, why she was here. I wanted to step forward and touch the hem of her dress to prove it was real. Instead, my feet carried me back until the door clicked shut, and my hands locked around the knob so hard my knuckles whitened. I ran. The next morning, the room was immaculate as always. When I flinched at the shadow of the bedspread and reached for the pillow, my fingers brushed downy fabric and something hard. I turned the pillow over and found, on the side, facing away from me as if waiting for discovery, a single black hair. Thick and coiled, too long and too dark to be any of ours. I kept it folded in my palm for longer than I should have, feeling the shaft between my fingertips, as if it were proof I hadn't dreamed her. The head housekeeper saw me with it. Her face didn't register surprise. Her expression was the same calmly resigned one she wore when a heavy vase tipped over or the silver needed polishing. "Dispose of it," she said plainly, "in the silver bin." I obeyed, but the hair stayed with me in the way small facts do when they refuse to let go. That night I dreamt of a bed that made itself sheet by sheet, while a woman sat at the edge and pressed her palm into the mattress as if smoothing a wrinkle out of time. I lasted a fortnight after that. The job paid well. I had bills, a sister schooling in the next town. I told myself I was practical, that there were stories in every house that had no bearing on the truth. But the penthouse's quietness pressed on me. I caught myself avoiding the 27th floor, taking the elevator to lower levels, and walking the stairs 2 flights down to avoid the hush of the corridor that led to that particular door. On my last night, I stayed late polishing the brass rail in the stairwell. The chandelier threw long shadows, and for a moment, moving them, the light made a figure in the corridor. I froze, breath in my throat. A woman in black leaning against the wall, hair hanging like a wet curtain. She lifted her head and, for the first time I could remember, looked straight at me. Not through me, not out of the mirror, but at me. I stepped forward because there is a small bravery in the heads of the frightened. She was closer than she had been before, but still, the air smelled of lavender and nothing else. Her lips moved and I could not hear the words. The house kept its own silence like a closed fist. I left in the morning. I did not wait for a wave of sympathy or explanation. The Benedettis did not ask why. The butler took my uniform and signed the ledger with the same neat hand he used to write dates. He folded the black hair into a small square with the care of someone handling a relic and placed it in the silver bin without comment. His eyes flicked to the 27th floor door once, then down at his hands, and he said nothing. Sometimes, in a cheap motel with a plastic lamp and a humming fridge, I wake with the ghost of that voice on my tongue. In shop windows, I catch my reflection, and, for a blink, the woman in black sits across from me, smoothing a bed I never made. The hair is long gone. I burned it in an ashtray the day I left. Still, when curtains shift, though no breeze stirs them, I look toward the place they are closed over and think of the bed that never gets used, and the woman who keeps it immaculate.